What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of The Dig, a series dedicated to helping you improve profitability on your farm.
On today's episode, we're going to be digging into our 5 PFR Proven Success Strategies for soybeans to set you up for a successful 2023 season. This is Collin, and I'm Aaron.
Let's dig in. Each year brings new data from our Practical Farm research team. By looking at diverse products and practices across several locations, we have identified top PFR proven strategies for success based on what we have learned in our PFR studies that can lead you to higher soybean yields.
First up, let's talk about soybean seed treatments. During cool, wet springs, seedling diseases are common, and depending on the duration of the adverse weather, plants may struggle with emergence. This is where Beck's Escalate Yield Enhancement System comes into play. Beck is continuously working to make this seed treatment the best in the industry by testing new biologicals, fungicides, and insecticides that are out there on the market.
Seed treatments surround the seed in a protective chemistry and proactive biologicals that help the crop get off to a good start. As earlier planting dates tend to drive yields, seed treatments will play an increasingly more important role in protecting the plants from diseases and insects.
You know, Collin, we just did a whole video on seed treatments actually.
Absolutely.
So if you really want to dig in a little bit deeper into seed treatments, I encourage you to go check that video out.
So to wrap it all up, seed treatments are a crucial component to high-yielding soybeans and stand establishments. It only makes sense to combine some of these success strategies. We're going to talk about planting date, seeding rates, and row width. Through years and years of PFR testing, we can confidently say that planting early pays and can result in earlier canopy coverage.
That's right, Collin. Nodulation is a really critical part of soybean yields. We have to be able to supplement that nitrogen to that soybean plant through that nodulation process. But when we start thinking about other factors that influence our soybean yields, we need to start looking at nodes per acre, not necessarily plants per acre, but maximizing those nodes per acre. So how do we do that, especially in an early planting situation? So the nodes are the part of the stem where each leaf branches off. Earlier planting gives the plants an opportunity to put more nodes on each plant because it spends more time in that vegetative growth stage. So planting fewer plants per acre encourages each plant to increase that branching, thus increasing our nodes per acre.
5 years of multi-location data indicates the power of early planting, as every population planted early beats all populations planted late. Lighter soils, poorly drained soils, and narrower rows respond best to higher planted populations. The difference in the economic optimum seeding rate for each planting date are mainly driven by seed cost, not yield.
This PFR data clearly shows that an early planted population of 100,000 seeds per acre can produce higher yields than a later planted population of 175 or even 200,000. Now, we don't necessarily condone you going out there and planting 100,000 seeds per acre. However, this data indicates two things. Seeding soybeans in excess of 150,000 is likely less profitable. And the second thing, any seeding rate planted early outyields any seeding rate planted later. And it's better to keep a reduced soybean stand that was planted early as opposed to coming in, ripping it up, and replanting later.
Our 25-year multi-location optimum planting window suggests that planting soybeans between April 16th and April 30th is the most profitable.
But what if conditions are not ideal and you're faced with a delayed planting situation?
University research indicates that soybean yield loss from delayed planting can cost up to 1 bushel per day after June 1st, depending on where you live. That's why it is essential to make good agronomic decisions when faced with delayed soybean planting. Narrowing row widths and increased seeding rates are two ways to improve yield potential when faced with delayed soybean planting.
One change that is not proven to be successful in the face of a delayed planting situation is switching to an earlier maturity soybean. PFR data is clear and consistent. When we get faced with that delayed planting situation, it's best to stick with an adapted fuller season variety for your area. This is important because it allows for more vegetative growth before switching over to the reproductive growth stages, so we can set more nodes and more potential pods on that plant.
Now, I know we've already talked about it, but it is true. Narrower row widths harvest more sunlight, especially in combinations with early planting, and help shade the rows to improve weed control. Aaron, that was a lot of information. Wrap it up for us.
All right, to make things simple, early planting. If we find ourselves in an early planted situation, we can drop our populations down a little bit, and we can also stick with some maybe not ideal stands as long as they were planted early. We start talking about late planted situations, we need to think about maybe increasing our populations and also sticking with our fuller season maturities. And then lastly, when it comes to row widths, the narrower that we can get those beans planted while maintaining the precision of a row unit is going to be our best bet.
Let's dig into our 5th soybean success strategy, fungicide timing. Fungicides are an integral part to maximizing soybean production to protect yields, improve harvestability, and preserve grain quality. While they primarily prevent or mitigate disease pressure, they also can increase water use efficiency, photosynthesis, nitrate reductase activity, increase window for grain fill, and improve stress tolerance.
Our 7-year PFR data shows a $17 per acre return on investment from an R3 application of a fungicide and an insecticide. Multi-year data summaries using various soybean fungicides indicate that R3 is the optimum growth stage for making a foliar fungicide application to maximize our ROI. The R3 growth stage in soybeans is identified by having at least one pod that is 3/16 of an inch long at one of the 4 most upper nodes on the main stem with a fully developed leaf.
Because R3 is the start of pod development, it is also the best time to control diseases and insects. The majority of soybean grain yields, about 70%, comes from nodes 6 through 13, which are present at that R3 growth stage. An R3 application would provide additional protection to those nodes, which might explain the positive yield response.
Now, one exception to this rule is when we're trying to manage for white mold or other foliar diseases using a fungicide. If white mold is something that you deal with annually, or you experienced cool and wet conditions with high relative humidity and a dense canopy, the optimum fungicide application timing is at flower initiation, which is around that R1 timeframe.
In some years, the weather doesn't always cooperate, and we are faced with delayed planting of soybeans. When this occurs, it's assumed that yield levels and profitability is reduced, so the desire to invest in that crop declines. While this assumption can seem valid, a decision still needs to be made about how heavily to invest in that crop.
Now, when we're talking soybeans, investing in a fungicide application in a late planted crop is just as essential to optimize yield. Late planted soybeans will have fewer nodes, so protecting those few nodes we have and extending growth and protecting them further into the growing season is critical. Now, one thing to consider with fungicide applications on soybeans is that they do tend to keep the plants alive and greener a little bit longer, which helps explain the yield bump a little bit. We should also think about harvest timing in those situations as well.
When planning your fungicide applications, timing is just as important when you're considering the time of day. Fungicide applications appear to be more effective when applied in the morning.
Wait a second. I think I'm a fungicide application. I'm more effective in the morning too. Once I eat my lunch, I'm shot for the rest of the
Day's
afternoon.
over.
Day's over. Over the last 3 years and multiple locations, our data suggests that when it comes to the best time of day to spray that fungicide on your beans, 8 a.m. is gonna be the sweet spot, as it gave us about a half a bushel advantage over that 3 p.m. application. Okay, Collin, wrap it up for us.
Timing is everything when it comes to soybean fungicide. Remembering when exactly that R3 growth stage is. Think about that 3/16 pod. Time of day. Getting up in the morning, getting that cup of coffee, jump in that sprayer, get every acre that we can cover in the morning covered as much as possible.
Yep. Take advantage of that free carrier rate from all that new.
Yep.
All right, well, that wraps things up for our soybean success strategies. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of
The Dig.
Mountain she'll be coming round, mountain she'll be coming round, mountain when she comes.
Yeehaw!
Bang, bang, bang. She'll be riding 6 white horses when she comes.
Yeehaw!
She'll be riding 6 white horses when she comes.
Yeehaw!
She'll be riding 6 white horses. She'll be riding 6 white horses. She'll be riding 6 white horses when she comes.
Yeehaw!
There's some good bonus
You got
footage
enough
for
right
ya.
there for the next 2 years.
I don't know.
That was amazing.